Welcome back, HC Nation. This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. That's right. Here we're going to be talking about everything history. But before that, thanks to our sponsors, Historical Conquest, well, this is my company, but our game. So my company creates Historical Conquest, which is a really fun card game where you're playing to conquer the world, much like the game of Risk, but using, instead of little figures, you're playing with cards of actual people from history. Can't be more fun than that. Actually, it can. So every card in the game, its abilities for the game are based off the history. So every ability is unique, which makes it for a lot of fun when it comes to discussing the rules of those abilities. So the game is very complex, but it's not that difficult or complicated. The complexity comes in the gameplay itself. Okay, now, Historical Conquest. Okay, one thing we're going to be talking about today is the Romans. Wow. Today we're heading back to the dawn of Roman power. Before the empire, before the Colosseums, and even before any kind of empire. It was basically a city at this point. Now, we talked about this last week, where they were starting to expand, starting to cooperate with the other groups that were in the peninsula. Let me show you this picture I have of here. So you have the Celts, you have the Etruscans, you have the Latins, you have the Romans, and you have the Greeks, and a whole lot of other people mixed in to this small little peninsula. Everyone vying for power, vying for land, vying for survival. Survival because, as I said, everything in the ancients, all their advancements, all their technology, everything was about survival. Then, as soon as they knew that they were established and could survive, that's when they started going out for other advancements, such as entertainment and other things like that. So today, in this episode, we'll cover the critical first steps Rome took to basically take that city beyond the Tiber River to dominate the forces of basically the whole Italian Peninsula. So we're going to be talking about three things. I always talk about this. There's always three things when we start. How Rome expanded across Italy. That's the first thing we're going to be talking about. The second thing, the conquest of the Italian Peninsula, conquering the whole thing. And then the third one, minus, there will be some that we will leave behind. And that was what will start Wednesday's discussion of the Punic Wars. So stay tuned for that. The third thing we're going to be talking about is the creation and evolution of the Roman legions, one of the most effective military force in all of history. They were in control. They knew exactly what they were doing. So let's begin just after Rome cast off all the kings. You know, we talked about that. You had Romulus, who basically started Rome, possibly within myth or legend, not quite sure. Then you had Brutus, who after his uncle's son stabbed a noblewoman, actually no, he didn't stab her, abused her, and then the noblewoman, because of what he did, killed herself. I'm trying to find a better way of saying this. Killed herself. Brutus stood up and pushed the kings out. Now, last week we talked about the culture and other things. I told you we were going to get back to when they actually took over the peninsula, because this is significant. They were just one group in this vast peninsula of different groups. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Roman expansion into Italy. Okay, this is creating more than just a city-state, which is what Rome is, and creating a regional power. So when the Roman Republic was founded, around 509 BC, we talked about this last week, it was just one small city, and also known as a city-state in central but coastal, central but coastal city in Italy. It was surrounded by its rivals. We had the Latins. We had other ones like the Etruscans. And in the north, the Etruscans were in the north, and then you had the Samnites, who were in the southeast, more the east. But you had all these different groups all vying for this land. Now, over the next 2 centuries, Rome moved carefully, forging alliances with these groups. Again, this is also something we talked about. I'm just doing a recap of basically last week. They made alliances with all these different groups. Some, they fought, but they were still small. It's like the United States. If you're listening to our podcast yesterday, you were learning about the going into the War of 1812, and Britain and France basically saying, hey, we need you on our side, and the United States saying, hey, we're small, we're neutral, we're not doing this. Well, Rome knew that they didn't want to be neutral for long. They wanted to take over. So they started working on it. So early on, and again, this took about 2 centuries to do, with these alliances, creating roads, and often absorbing other groups in with them. So early on, we talked about this last week also, Rome had a deal with the Etruscans, who had once ruled over Roman area. And this was during the monarchy. But when Rome pushed out the monarchy, Brutus pushed out his uncle, victory in war, like the Battle of Lake Regillus, I think it was called, that was in 496 BC, helped Rome to gain dominance among the Latin cities. But the real test came in the Samnite Wars. This is about 343 to 290 BC. It was a series of brutal, mountainous conflicts that basically challenged Rome and its resilience. Now, remember, Rome was picked as a very strategic area. It was surrounded by mountains, by hills. It gave them an advantage over the others, anyone else that would try to come in and take over them. Let's just tell you about some of the key points in these battles, or I guess this battle, the Samnite battles, Samnite Wars. Now, wars, multiple, 3 at least. 3 main ones. Okay, we had the Claudian Forks. This was 329 BC. It's a humiliating Roman defeat where an entire army was forced to surrender. Yeah, so they're trying to go after the Samnites. Samnites end up packing. But instead of breaking, Rome came back and regrouped. So by the end of the Third Samnite War, they kept going back against the Samnites. Now, as you can see, the border of Roman territories, and the Samnites, they're bordering on each other. So there's constant conflicts. The first one, failure. The second one, near failure. But by the third time, they actually learned what the Samnites were, how they warred, how they battled. The problem was the Samnites always tried to figure out how the Romans learned, but they were learning from the Samnites. So if you don't really have a strategy, and that group beats you down the first time, beats you down the second time, the third time it's like, I'm still going to beat you down the exact same way. But you're looking at everything the Samnites are doing. So by the third time, you attack hard, and you do exactly what they do, just making it better. And so they then took over control over most of central and southern Italy. So Rome had learned a valuable lesson. Don't give up, adapt your tactics, and make your enemies so they can never rise up again. They can't attack you if you slam them down so hard that they fear coming against you. And the Samnites were basically taken over from Rome from sea to sea, basically. Mediterranean Sea to Mediterranean Sea. And coming down further south a little bit. Now, let's talk about the second one. The next part is how did they take over the whole Italian Peninsula? Taking over that whole chunk. Now, the first thing they had to do was make deals. So they had to figure out how to deal with the Greek colonies. Now, Greek colonies are down here. If you remember, the Greek colonies came in during Greece's power, and they basically settled in places like Spain and Italy and all over the Mediterranean. And some other groups were taking over these areas, and Rome's just one of them. By the 4th century BC, so that's in the 300s, Rome had expanded to the edge of the Greek colonies in southern Italy. They'd come all the way down. If I can see my mouse. come all the way down into the Greek colonies. Now, these are also Greek colonies. Now, Greece, even though it had been taken down a notch, it was still very strong. And so it could not, Rome could not jeopardize allowing the Greeks to get the rest of the army to take over. So he placed, so places like, I think there's called Tarentum, I'm trying to remember these names. It had ties with powerful city-states in Greece. They were friends with Greece. When Rome intervened in local disputes, Tarentum called for help. So it was a friend, and then it was not a friend. And the more the Greeks pushed on Tarentum, the more that Tarentum said, well, we're going to go after the bigger bully. Bigger because Rome had taken over a third of Italy. We need to go get them to help us. So they sided with them. From none other, you got to hear this one, of King Pyrrhus of Epirus. He's a relative of Alexander the Great, which led to the Pyrrhic War in 280 to 275 BC. That's right. So there's a war that started between the Greeks because King Pyrrhus, he was a Greek. He was a family member of Alexander the Great, and he wanted to take over all the Roman Empire. So Pyrrhus brought war elephants. This is the first mention of war elephants in Roman history. Because we know with the Punic Wars, you're going to have war elephants, but the Greeks brought them first. So Pyrrhus brought these war elephants and professional Hellenistic army. That's right. Alexander the Great was still in power. So because he was still in power, well, Alexander the Great, dead. But his followers afterwards, still in power, still strong army, they brought over the elephants. And, well, he won. He won the battle, actually, I think 2 or 3 battles, but suffered heavy losses, leading to the phrase Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory basically means you got a victory, but you gave up a lot doing it. So eventually, Rome outlasted Pyrrhus, who then basically withdrew, and Tarentum fell. By 270 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian Peninsula all the way up to the Celts. And I say all the way up to the Celts because you don't really get to control them. They are very sporadic, and we're going to go over that later on. But this is from the Po River to the toes of the boots. Po River's up here, toes of the boots, as in this is like a boot, the Italian boot. Okay, so how did Rome, how did it all hold together? How did it conquer and keep its people happy? Well, conquest was one thing. Control was totally different for the Romans. They wanted to conquest, but they also wanted to control, and they had these things down. Why? Because they learned them from other people. They learned almost everything from other people. Think of a lot of the war strategies and the war weaponry. It's all learned by others, including the Greeks. So, Rome controlled a combination of ways. One, they had colonies, much like the Greeks had colonies. They planted Roman citizens and veterans in strategic areas. So in this, they're able to have specific people in power in specific areas to keep the people from uprising. What was the next one? This is the most famous thing they did. Created roads. Remember, one of the things that the Persians did that gave them so much power, especially over trade, was the royal road that later would become the Silk Road. So Rome created a vast system of roads. The most famous one is the Via Appia. Via Appia, love it. And that was actually started in 312 BC. They wanted to create a road that would go throughout their whole province. Sorry, the whole peninsula. Now, another thing is flexible alliances. Cities could become allies. These allies were called soci, without being fully conquered. So you just have to basically say, I'm loyal to Rome, and actually mean it, and they won't conquer and kill you. So in many cases, Rome allowed local autonomy in exchange for military service. Oh, look at that. You have to give up a bunch of your people to come serve in our military. And also you have to be loyal. And there is some tribute. Yeah, that's right. You need to pay up. Rome was all about being paid up because they had to pay for their army. They had to pay for their military, or pay for their officials. They had to pay for their government. All these things. And so by doing this, Rome got loyalty. People were afraid of them. They wouldn't let them get too big for their britches, some say. Yeah, so that way they were able to command control. So this system wasn't perfect. Of course, no system is. Remember, Rome, they learned over time how to do this. And this is 312 BC or so. But it was very effective in what it did. Rome created a network of loyalty and infrastructure. You're loyal to us, you will benefit from it. You'll be able to use our roads. You'll be able to use our strength. We will protect you. Not just a string of conquered cities. If you want to go to conquered cities, go check out what the Mongols did. Or the Huns did. And that's right, they went through and wiped out whole cities. You got Timur the Lame, and we'll talk about this later on. Fascinating time period. Okay, now, what did they actually have to pay for? And how did they take all this over? Let's go over some of the military. So this is the Roman legions. From the phalanx to the manipular legion. Okay, so early Roman armies used a Greek-style phalanx. So this was heavily armored soldiers stood in tight rows. Remember, when the British came to the Americas during the American Revolution and they tried to attack, they did a lot of the phalanx strategies. Phalanx is tightly knit people, everyone close together, everyone coming as one, on like a battlefield. Romans did the same thing. Where do you think the British learned it from? Yeah, all the way back to Rome. There were a lot of different lines. But the Americans, they weren't about that at all. They were about sabotage and hitting you when you're not expecting it. All these different things, which they basically learned somewhat from the Native Americans, who were perfect at this. They were great at this. So, okay, let's go back. So you did the phalanx, and they were heavily armed soldiers. But Italy's rough terrain, the hills, the forests, the valleys, much like the United States, like I just said, made this formation basically hard to maneuver, hard to control. So the Romans had to adapt. They created the manipular legion. It's a more flexible system based on 3 lines of troops. 3 lines. Wait a minute, that's a little mix of exactly what the British do too. They have lines. First line, second line of defense, third line. Okay, now the first line was called the hastiti. Now this is different than what the British did. The British had all trained troops. The hastiti, young soldiers in the front line. Why the young soldiers? They're the most energetic. They're the most resilient. So they put the youngest people in front. Line number 2 was the principes. The principes, more experienced men in the second line. Why? Because when the younger ones got tired, they would move up, the more experienced. Or the younger ones would jump behind the older ones, and the older ones would come out. And everyone that was already fighting is now tired because they were just fighting the younger version of these soldiers. Now, these soldiers who are more experienced are older, a little bit slower. By the time they come to the front, the other side is already tired, and the experienced ones can really ransack them. The third one was the veterans, only used in emergencies. Why? One, it showed you had a lot more people than you did that were able to fight. Two, the veterans, if the more experienced men were taken out, and the younger soldiers were taken out, then the very slower group was finally able to fight. Each group fought in maniples, called maniples, yes. It is basically blocks of about 120 men with space between them for movement. So you went from the Romans really close together. Now, one of the things with the Romans that the British didn't have, shields. The shields basically kept the Roman soldiers, especially those in the front, safe. If you had spears coming at you, you had the shield, which would help you stay away from that. What happened to the British? They didn't have shields. They had guns. They didn't have anything else. They had guns. So what happens when you shoot into a crowd? You're going to hit someone. And this is what the Romans learned, the British not so much. But they worked for them for what they did. So this made the Roman army more adaptable, mobile, and deadly. Okay, so what about the equipment that they used? So the Roman military, the soldiers wore heavy armor. We already talked about this. Helmet, shield, also called the scutum, the sword, gladius, and the javelin, the pilum, basically a spear. So they also, as part of their trimming was training, they had disciplines. They were very disciplined, which is why they were very disciplined. And they had a lot of training, which is basically all times. Basically, if you were a young soldier, you'd expect to stay in a fort for a long time, march long distances, and fight with precision, of which being at that fort, away from any kind of family, away from any distractions, your whole day is just battles. It's just preparing for the next battle. Okay. Now, they were commanded by the consuls. Who were the consuls? Remember, Caesar was a consul. But they also had military tribunes, but often learned leadership from battlefield experiences. They all did. Now, here's the thing. They had a delegation. You had the consul, who never really saw a battle. Not usually. And then you had all these other leaders that were put into the army based on the amount of people you had. And so that 120 would have one or two leaders. The multiple groups would have another set of leaders. And they pass down their information as you go. But they knew the more you passed it down, one, the more distorted it could be. And two, the harder it is sometimes to get the actual message to them fast enough. So, let's talk about the military and society. Military service wasn't just a duty, it was a path to honor. If you want to be a Patrician, the elite, you want to be in the military, you wanted honor, you want to show the world who you were. Now, only landowning citizens could serve. What? So none of the lower class could serve. They could be really strong, but they weren't to serve. It was only the landowners who could serve. Now, that's like reverse of everything you'd think. You'd think landowners are lazy, they want everyone else to fight for them, and they just want to go count their money. Wrong. In Rome, it was the opposite. The landowners were the ones that voted, and they also were the ones that served. Victory brought glory, wealth, and political advancements. Commanders who won great battles could earn a triumph, which is a parade through Rome. Yeah, you'd be recognized by basically everyone at that point. But it also meant that war and politics were deeply intertwined. And that success basically on the battlefield, often translated to success in the Senate. That's right. You're a warrior. You make it through so many wars. You show the world who you are. You're a commander that gets a triumph. You might become a new senator. Remember, senators are not voted on. They are assigned for life. A senator has to die for you to go in there, or they might open up for a few more. So that's it. I've got you prepared for the Punic Wars. We're going to be talking about that next. Now, Italy is taken over by Rome. Rome has full control over everything. Let's recap really fast, and then we'll end this one. Okay, by the end of the 3rd century BC, so 200s, Rome had become the master of Italy through war, alliances, and infrastructure. Roads, alliances, diplomacy, war, military. Its legions were among the more effective fighting force in history, not just because they were strong, but because they learned. They learned every time they attacked. They were smarter, more flexible, and deeply Roman. Wait a second, deeply Roman. Yes, even those that came as loyalists from those city-states that they took over became very deeply loyal to the Romans. Now, the Romans did certain things to make that happen, including discipline and, I'm going to say this the nicest way, brainwashing. Basically, propaganda, those type of things in the ranks to make it so that you were 100% Roman. You were 100% going to do your best and everything you could do. So Rome conquered Italy, city-states, tribes, they did it city by city, tribe by tribe. Just took them all over. It created a network of roads, alliances, and military colonies throughout the peninsula to keep it all safe. And it developed a military system that would soon take it from beyond Italy's borders and into the whole Mediterranean. Okay, engagement questions. I got one for you. If you lived in early Rome, would you have joined the legion? Would you have? Bring you honor, bring you strength. You have to be really good. You have to survive. Or would you try to rise through politics? Or, third one, I didn't put in my question, or would you just say, I don't care about it. I'm going to live my life as I am and be happy with it. Put them in the comments below. Love to hear what you think. Every time. I love hearing what you have to think, or what you think. So let us know. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. On Thursday, we're going to be talking about the Punic Wars, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We're going to be talking about elephants in battle, more elephants in battle, and we're going to talk about expansion over the Mediterranean. So don't miss this. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.